Hello everyone, today we talk about the Teutonic Knights habit around the 13th century. We'll talk in other videos also about other periods. A figure that you could easily look at just from the tomb effigy of Conrad of Thuringia. That was the Hochmeister, so the Grand Master of the Teutonic Knights between 1239-41. There you have a pretty detailed sort of image of what we're talking about today. You know, the Teutonic Knights habit, just like the one of the monastic military orders, was conceived to be primarily simple, humble, but also effective, practical, also in combat, as we will see partly now. Naturally, we do not know everything that we would like, especially for the earlier days. Regarding the cloth manufacturing, issuing, distribution, making, and so on, for the various members of the order. We know, of course, enough about the regulations, though, so it's relatively easy to look at them briefly. And we can add through this yet another tacit to the list of sort of historical military dress. So we talk about the Teutonic Knights in other videos, such as the one for the Historical Origin series about the Teutonic Order as the Ordenstaat and as a political territorial power. We talked about the Teutonic Knights here and there in the videos about the Mongol invasion of Europe, even though it was mostly just an anecdotal reference. I also made a video about the Teutonic flags that, however, I have to re-upload because this was before 2 years ago, and so that there is that issue with images. But we will have more concretely to get down also to the actual arms and armor and battles and tactics and organization and so on. Today we talk also about the Sword Brethren, that, as you know, were another order that was founded by Albert of Riga of Livonia during the Baltic during the Baltic Crusades, and that following their defeat by the Samogitians and the Semigallians in the Battle of Shaolin in 1236, was incorporated, surviving brothers, right, merged into the Teutonic Order, right, and they would essentially survive as an autonomous branch known as the Livonian Order, all right. That military tradition followed, and they had, as we will see now, their own symbols, essentially a red star and sword. The same is for the case of the Order of Dobrzyn, that was in fact similarly founded, and in the face of, say, lack of success in battle against the Prussians, as well as their small numbers, because these were smaller than the Teutonic Knights. At its highest, we're talking about 35 knights, right, specifically for the Dobrzyn. So that tells you a thing. But they were ultra, these monastic military orders were elite to consider, right? So in around 1235, the majority of these knights joined the Teutonic Order as well, as followed by a papal document that was the Golden Bull of Rieti. What can we say? Of course, there is a moral dimension that we will look at the end, right, regarding the Teutonic habit as far as the broader regulation of the order was concerned, because, of course, we look at not much at the material history of it, that is also relatively simple, but at the spiritual meaning, which is even more pronounced, as you realize in such orders, and that had to somehow separate the same from the rest of the, let's say, secular knightry. This is incredibly relevant because, as we've seen already in the videos about the Templars, the Hospitallers, etc., that had basically all the same origins, like with Teutonic ones in that case in the same Levant, right? Eventually they went to Hungary, then they settled as Polish vassals in the Baltic, and they're all the story, but you know that. But they were founded, well, yes, originally just as the many brotherhoods that existed that all the various universitates, as they were known in Latin, right? Every sort of community that corporatistic sense was part, in fact, of the broader body of Christendom, and was subjected to the emperor, to the pope, and that, however, started as a sort of German hospital, but eventually evolved for security reasons, of course, into the knightly order, also per se, with the military dimension attached. And as you know, the Teutonic Knights were just like the Templars, the Hospitallers, basically were the top-notch cavalry, sort of properly knightly elite, right? So we're not talking about knights like others, albeit they had the same identical armament of any other knight, but as well we know from our Clausewitzian series, moral forces predominate, and so the main and deep difference, albeit it was not, say, functionally different from the one of the, say, secular knights, was the much greater indoctrination, training, say, sort of mystical, spiritual training of these individuals in an order that, again, was also pretty strict, had a very stern Spartan rule, and this obviously is somehow difficult for us to understand, because we made also many videos about monasticism in general, and technically there was no difference even here between the monks, the other monks and these ones, right, except that they were also knights, right? And the idea being also in monasticism that you may, in that sense, see as I get also from the fact that I get much less views every time I talk about Christian history for some abominable reason, I think, but and of course that betrays the complete illiteracy of whoever thinks that they can study the Middle Ages without a severely structured Christian education. Otherwise, but that's not just for medieval history. Any history is impossible to be learned without this, and also a broader background in the history of religion, but had the point of making the world heaven. In other words, as we have explained countless times in religious tradition, transfiguring the world itself. And while the monastic experience was traditionally more, on average, more like non-violent and more and non-military specifically, it had an imitative purpose, right? Of course, was Christomimetic, but it was also in a deeper sense, right? That, of course, should be understood if one gets the actual knowledge of the gospel, but not only. Inasmuch as this sort of retirement from the world, right, had a preparatory purpose for the onslaught against the forces of evil for the world conquest, right? The same brotherhoods of warriors in ancient times, as we've seen, were fundamentally outcasts, secluded from the rest of civilized society, and they had to be so because the only way in order to turn them I made a video that is literally named From Saviors to Outlaws, right? A bit the history of the beast warriors and so on, but at least initially they had this substantially military function for which entire peoples could actually carry that out, and it took a specific ritual, it took a specific lifestyle, it took a specific capacity of extraneation from the more illusory side of existence, and that is basically everything that doesn't concern the spiritual one, right? So the idea that the world was, and there was of course a lot of as we've seen in the videos about medieval Christianity, an enormous debate, to say the least, throughout all, the millennia, actually, even beyond saying Christianity, of whether, what kind of training was necessary to re-achieve heaven, right? Which is a collective effort. You see, no Christian there was thinking to, at this point, of managing to do the thing by itself. Not just because, of course, there is a divine medium, right, in the Son of the Trinity, but that is not the limit of it. It's not that the thing was not passing through, in fact, the same Christomimesis, and so that the ultimate ambition was to achieve that in a way. But because, of course, the world had been realizing for more than a millennium that humanity had been falling to a point that it was particularly difficult to achieve this, if not, and especially within the church and within the, let's say, the reaffirmation of what was the empire, its Romanity, its Christianity, and beyond. So this is particularly evident for the Teutonic order as far as their connection with the Holy Roman Empire were concerned, right? These orders, this is true also for the Templars and the hospital, basically for all the orders in the Holy Land, at least, that in the 13th century, at the peak of both their own quality and the one of universal powers in chivalric feudal warfare, were, let's say, the most dedicated, committed, established, renowned, in fact, military capable of carrying out that self-sacrifice in order to try to save the world from, to reverse the fall of the world. Complicated story, as you understand, but that required, of course, a commitment that went beyond basic everyday life, right? Most of the approach that, say, the medieval history sympathizers, let's call them like this in pop culture, do is, the Middle Ages was just, after all, a cool time because people were just true men, because, I don't know, they ran a farm, and every once in a while they went on raiding, doing something, so that it wasn't all this sort of bad ideology we see today in everything, except at the time, people believed the same thing. They believed that this was a degenerate world and that it must be fixed, and actually that same lifestyle was a living hell, for which, of course, these people did understand. And this is the thing that we do not understand. They did understand better what was necessary to achieve in order to transfigure, because they felt pain much more than us. And of course, this was understood definitely as a divine grace, because, as you know, the more you reach the limit and the breaking point, and the closer you are to God. And so understanding everything in much deeper, in greater depth, and in this sense, in greater objectivity and perspective, because it's that wisdom eventually that makes you aware of the, let's say, the dynamic through which you can approach the truth, right? And of course, this life of abnegation and of self-sacrifice and total devotion and commitment and faith was seen as a huge deal, because these individuals were taking up this burden for many others. What is interesting, naturally, is that the same orders were real. Like, this is especially the case of the Teutonic order, was a real state, right? The Teutonic state was also one of the most effective and power concentrated and disciplined of the medieval world, right? There was all an ethos connected with this martial order of traumatic and irreversible brutality that brought to the literal extermination of entire peoples in the Baltic, but it had the specific purpose of re-establishing the age of order. These were true makers of civilization against the forces of chaos, right? And I will not spend this video to explain why, a certain worldview and certain beliefs and etc. are, the age of order as opposed to one of chaos, right? But that's also, in fact, something I discuss in the videos about Christian history, and that we will have to come back on, especially as far as the Christianization of the Baltic is concerned. And that it would strike you how close it is to our clash for civilization today, right? And with all the double-edged implications of the same, you cannot wield the sword without having a much greater responsibility deriving from that, right? And so it's much more difficult than sitting there and just being part of the mass and complaining and wanting an unregulated anarchic communistic system, except it's also the only purpose of a human being, right? And because it's the only way to divinely transfigure as a direction, at least. And so everything can easily fall, just like in the biblical punishment, from the very top, from the very best, right? And so this force of light cannot come but through that capacity to handle the darkness, which definitely a 13th century knight, not just a Teutonic one, was, as we have explained in the shocking psychology, and especially of how that was achieved, right? And what kind of training these people went through could get. Like it was in part and surely connected with especially for somebody that undergoes military training and that has the proper purpose of fighting. It is quite concretely, and as a professional elite, by the way, and the ultra elite that was literally dominating the world at this point, having a pretty concrete idea of how much blood had to be spilled, right, in order to bring to that order. And that's also because this is what those knights were conceived for, right? They, at least against an average enemy, they were meant to fall just after having killed 20, 30 people on average. So it's a big deal. In any case, the main regulation that we can document about the Teutonic habit, which is in fact the foundational one, the one would remain also later times, basically, is the one by Emperor Frederick II and the Pope, by the way, in 1244, because of course this was the deal, and never think that even in the bitterest clashes between the papacy and the empire, either of the two ever disconfessed each other in a concrete sense. So everybody understood what this order had to be about. And the most obvious, self-evident, notorious characteristic of the Teutonic Knights was the white habit. Right? The white habit that will remain. Before 1244, however, we know that, of course, this was not so generalized, was not even recognized as a privilege, because white, as we'll see, of course, had a specific symbol in this circumstance. It is clear from effigies like the aforementioned ones of Conrad of Thuringia and various other sources that while the Teutonic Knights' mantlets were white right before 1244, their tunics were gray. Right, and we also know that the sergeants of the Teutonic Order continued to wear gray even after 1244. We'll explain now why, but there are beautiful artistic representations of this. Perhaps the most famous one coming from the early 14th century Manesse Code, showing the very famous Minnesänger Tannhäuser, right? If you're interested, of course, in Germanic epochs of the time, you know the name. There is also Wagner's homonymous opera that is set in exactly in this context. In any case, the guy became a Teutonic knight, and is also said to have lost. There's a bit of legend actually behind him in many ways, but the story goes that he went over to the Baltic, never to return. In any case, it's so iconic just because the monastic code is so beautiful, right? It's one of the most famous iconographic sources, one of the famous manuscripts of the time. Is being taken a bit as the standard of the Teutonic knight for illustrations in general, but given that this dates to the early 14th century, we mentioned at least since 1244, technically the tunic had to be white too. Tannhäuser instead wears a grey tunic and a cap with a white mantle. Now, what was the symbolism behind these colors, or the practicality, also the same material? Well, first of all, the change in color, the uniformation in 1244, was due to the prestige of the order's rule and consolidation over Prussia and the neighboring areas, thanks to the military exploit of St. Knights. You know that they had been fundamentally expelled from Hungary. We were just talking about it the other day in the video about medieval Transylvania, because they were settled there to fight against the nomadic pagans from the other side of the Carpathians, and they began to efficiently create a sort of state within that region, and the Hungarian king that had already problems with decentralization basically kicked them out before it was too late. This was the story, however, in Poland, or at least in the Baltic, but also in chunks of of the Kingdom of Poland, which the Teutonic Knights were technically vassals, right, as they had settled there through that procedure. But going back to the color and the symbolism, of course, the Teutonic Knight's mantle was white because it symbolized purity and righteousness, right? The color white meant institutionally, politically there, a role of election of the Teutonic Knights as a bit as the holy Armstrong of the also quite imperially and Romanly oriented Frederick of the Second of Hohenstaufen. The color white was also associated with the Christian faith itself, right? The knights consider, of course, themselves to be soldiers of Christ. Thus, the white mantle represented their devotion to God. Additionally, white, especially for the mantle, as you can start understanding the difference in a way, was a practical choice as it was easy to spot on the battlefield, right? And it allowed knights to show off their Teutonic badges we will see now and other symbols, by the way, and that's an interesting aspect that is somehow overlooked. So, sort of uniform, and this is important and interesting because the way, of course, you can expect a mantle to look like before a battle was not, during a campaign at least, was not perhaps the whitest you can imagine, but there was actually a discipline about this as well, right? Because as we will see now, the knights couldn't even simply lock their mantles into their caskets and simply not, pulling that out just in the moment of need. There was some of that, of course, in representative terms, but having greater care for your uniform, as you know, is quite a thing still today. And these were knights, right? So that they were the elite within the order itself. They had therefore to take care and be taken great care of, because they cost an hallucinating amount of moral and material resources. I still have to make a video explaining how much a medieval knight cost specifically. And what is fascinating, especially during the 13th century, that as we've seen is the peak of feudal power, technological innovation, and so on. This was the single most functional type of warrior existing out there, so much so that the entire system revolved around him, right? And so was as far as the world was concerned. And so this purity, right, this ability of, being, even just on the floor and being recognized, right, until rifled barrels, it was normal for especially the most important elements of the formation to show off, right, to be seen as much as possible, because that had a massive psychological influence on those who followed, right, because it showed utmost bravery, and this was in relation to, say, the chances, of course, of getting killed, etc., still functional. It was important for these guys to show off, to be recognized. So you surely can imagine that this white appearance, that again is difficult to find, especially in the ambushes, right, in the swamps and forests of the Baltic, was also just quite of an appearance, right? Everybody could recognize these guys that, to the eyes of most people, were sort of still demigods in the mentality of the, especially of the pagans, by the way, that were to fight against them. And of course the skills, as we were saying before, these forces were quite extraordinary by themselves. Overall, the white mantle was thus a distinctive and symbolic uniform that helped to establish the identity of the Teutonic Knights as one of the top orders of warrior monks. Speaking of the grey tunic that was, as we've seen, used originally by the same Teutonic Knights, and then still by some, even after the issuing of the white tunic privilege in 1244, was a practical color for battle, right? It did not easily show dirt or blood stains as other colors of the same white. Additionally, the grey color provided a neutral and unassuming appearance, which was useful for covert operations as much as still stressing the humility and the sort of down-to-earth, of course, recognition of human limits and the need to exalt the spiritual side, not the appearance, right, not the color, etc., in order to elevate oneself over the same somber reality, just per se. This is a particularly important point because, of course, we can imagine on campaign this great whiteness not being exactly the remembrance of an earthly dimension other than just the heavenly one, right? And so the contrast existing between the two. Other identificative badge, like even just, uniformological sense, but mostly for their own pride and, sense of themselves, was, of course, the cross, right? The cross on the left breast of the mantle, a black cross, right? That was not particularly big, right? Just the trait would be a few inches in depth, something between 7-10 centimeters. All right. The Teutonic Knights chose the black cross as their emblem in honor of the black belt of Saint John the Baptist. Right. The black cross also symbolized their military order, its commitment to defend Christianity against enemies. In fact, black was considered a symbol of mourning for the sins of humanity, that evidently the Teutonic Knights were called to fight, right? Not as just, first of all, within themselves, in a psychomachia, but effectively, as we've seen, also war being the same. And so those who fought for the wrong reasons had to be rectified. Let's put it in this way. Saint John the Baptist had come with his black belt to confront the guilty men of Israel, right? So his dress was the most appropriate reminder of the crimes of humanity, and so that sense, paving the way to the Redeemer, and that's how the Teutonic Knights would see themselves, even though, as you know, they were mostly devoted to the Virgin Mary, right? And that's a symbol that you could find. We'll talk about the flags as well. We have already talked about that, but there are other videos, different periods about the Teutonic flags that think about Marienburg, even just in their main possessions, etc. So a deep religiosity and a complexity of symbolism that, as we've seen, were not really allowed to a great extent as far as at least the military dress was concerned, because it was very, as we've seen, somber, uniform. No differentiation was allowed in practice. Sergeants in the order wore, in the place of the black cross, a black three-armed tau cross, so also known as the crux commissa, right? There was a lot of sort of numerological, symbological tradition in Christianity. Now we can't quite explain, but the capital T shape that this crux commissa took was the way you would distinguish the sergeants from the knights. The symbolism there having to do with the obvious fact that the cross has let's say a transverse. Of course, an arm of it is projected towards the sky, right, and is heavenly in a nature that only the knight can hope to attain. Always remember that only those who bore the cingulum militaris were technically provided with the imperium in the Middle Ages, just like in antiquity. So sergeants, of course, were in arms, and they had a dimension of that. In fact, even wearing this tau still sort of circumcluded especially the sacrificial moment of Christ, and still the moment before, or in the instant in which he would be able to resurrect, right? At least the moment in which he passed, right, still remaining alive. And so a suspense state that was the one in which the sergeants felt themselves to be, compared to the knights that by the 13th century were, even just in the secular world, were ever more distinguished basically from anyone else, mostly through the dubbing ceremony that was not for all knights technically, but at least those who were called knights, as opposed to simple soldiers, we can say, were ever more distinguished like. And of course also in the order was an important hierarchy, and the sergeant's tau had to do with this sort of non-knightly status, or how also it was defining the order. By the way, the Teutonic Knight's hat would be white as well. Have different information about the beard, because some say that it was mandatory for all brethren, while others said that the knights were allowed to wear a beard if they wanted to, but they had at least to keep their hair short, right? And this may have changed at different times as far as I know, there was a sort of hieratic symbolism in the beard, whereas the hair was considered as a symbol of beauty and, of course, of broader virtue of some sort. At least in the secular world, I don't know, the German or Polish knights that fought against the Mongols just to die at Lenitsa were convinced that having long hair was a proof of moral superiority, right? And I have all my hair, in spite of my age, so I could be sympathetic towards that. If it wasn't for the fact that, of course, the transient dimension of this life, and the fact that, of course, that all shall pass if you're not concentrated on the essence, on the spirit. It is true that hair is still part of the body, and so you had to transfigure through the same, but say it was considered more like as a distraction, as long as it was just a material element, right? So the Teutonic knights had to keep their hair tidy, right? The aforementioned sword Breton and the Knights of Dobrzyn also wore white habits. Let's remember, these were separated orders initially, and even though they were absorbed by the Teutonic one, they had, in fact, this privilege as knights to maintain that sort of distinguished branches, provided with the same whiteness, right, of the Teutonic element. The only difference was the symbol that consisted, in the case of the sword Brethren, of a star over a sword turned downwards, while the Knights of Dobrzyn had a David star over the same sword. So what was the symbolism of this red? Well, of course, it was a sacrificial dimension, symbol of blood, etc. But the and of the passion, and so of that coming closer to Christ through the mission this knights had, this infernal mission this knights had. But the most obvious symbolism about the star topping the sword fixed on the ground was the revelation of Jesus to non-Christians, especially considering the Baltic context. In other words, as these knights used to pray, by the way, not differently from, by the way, their pagan ancestors, or even those that were fighting, in fact, up there, was to fix the sword on the ground or on a mound, wherever, and to pray to the sun, right? And this, of course, was the rising sun. We've seen the Sol Invictus symbology, the concept of sacred royalty, and what the empire embodied still quite evidently, because it's, as we have seen in the same time of Frederick II, that the reference to this rising sun is to be found, right, for him, for this ruler. So the actual meanings were there, right? In 13th century Germany, you still could see dracones floating over the same Christian armies. So a time in which tradition and modernity were meeting dramatically, as together with probably the peak desert, as we've seen this golden age, or say medieval Germany, right? The Hohenstaufen and the broader myth of the empire, the Crusades, the possibility of reuniting West and East. So everything here had pretty comprehensive, specific meaning that it's very difficult for us to understand, right? But that is really clear once you descend into the sources. You realize how these individuals saw reality, right? Germany was really blossoming from a time of primitiveness, of warlikeness that would continue, of course, even in this fully feudal period, but that was quite unique in its kind. And the Baltic was an obvious aim for anyone who wanted to prove their commitment, even just fighting, say, under the knights, but not being under the Teutonic knights. I mean, not being part of them themselves, against the pagans, again in a time in which again the prestige of great rulers also was connected to that. Think about Ottokar II founding Königsberg, that is in fact taking the name exactly after him. It was a great competition as well, right? And the rising sun, the red globe, is something reminiscent of the Roman triumph, of the older Aryan ideology, of the new dawn, of the new age, of the new order. As you have understood by now, the appearance of members of the Teutonic Knights went against the secular knightly chivalric ethos from which the very records of the order were drawn. Right? So let's remember that these were people coming from the world, right? They had different stories, but we've seen it well already for the Templar Knights video, because this video, as you have understood, it's not about arms and armor. I said it at the very beginning. It is about just the clothes, right? But we will see better who the Teutonics were when we talk about their, so the prototype of the knight, also in combat, in values, and so on. But they were drawn from the German nobility that, of course, had incredibly secular values, also, as we've seen at borderline still with paganism to some degree, and very much into this sense of wealth and ostentation of power and prosperity. So everything that the order was trying to chastise, right? And especially knowing how strong the sacrifice there would have equated, given that these records were nurtured, were raised essentially from those worlds, right? And had joined the order after having even a full life in that world. There were many different backgrounds, right? There was a system of reference and of prestige, of course, as far as the entrance in the order was concerned. But that's the point of self-sacrifice. In order to be up to the Teutonic discipline, you had essentially to sacrifice everything you had. This was the bare minimum required, for example, to the older war bands, right, of devotees, fundamentally to the deity, that in the moment they entered in the order, in fact, they were not the same people. That's also why, in fact, the monks changed name when they were tonsured, because they were entering a new life, a new dimension. It was truly metaphysically intended. This entailed, more practically for a military professional, that they should have obeyed their orders with no regard for their own life, because now their life belonged fully to Christ, and they were in that order to prove that in the first place. So fighting and dying in his own name was the most obvious standard there, with a high degree of commitment. That, again, it's difficult to understand for today's time, but if you understand the political connection that this military instrument had, and the way it was employed, you have a pretty consistent idea of the expansion of the same Christendom, of the defense of the same imperial order, right? So literally the ecumenic empire, so everything that was to hold the world according to the highest standards. A secular knight in Germany would have, of course, regarded highly fine or decorated clothing, bright arms and armor, gilded horse harness. This was all normal for the German secular knightly elite, right? And they were extremely proud, of course, of their stock, of their arms especially. Another interesting detail in meaning about the 1244 papal allowance of the clerics of the Teutonic order to wear camilis over their other clothes, white having previously been, again, the mark of a broader knight, is about the Latin term we just quoted as, in ancient times, Roman times, the designated children free by birth who assisted the ancient Roman priests, right, especially the flamines, so those who also had to deal with sacred fire, right, in the European, in the sacrifices, were known as this, right? So, in other words, the Teutonic Knights were continuing to that tradition of essentially defense of sacred fire that, of course, was understood in a spiritual sense, but not only at this point, considering at least the role that even fire did have in Christendom as far as the elevation, like the actual consumption of the sacrifice, right? So something that eventually had to burn to make rising, right, to heaven, and as a tribute to God, right? So think about all the Baltic villages razed to the ground by the knights with iron and fire, right? That would have meant exactly that in perspective. Even maybe when a portable organ was playing, of course, Marian hymns where these knights were singing. So this is the picture, like how back it goes in time. I made a video about this, about the Indo-European doctrine of self-sacrifice from ancient times to the Templars, right? And if you actually look at what Bernard of Clairvaux says about the ultimate purpose of self-sacrifice and how this fits the Christian context as much as the pagan one before is extraordinary, to say the least. And these were exactly the times, the temper, right, the symbolisms that we're illustrating here. For the rest, any other sort of worldly splendor was forbidden, right? No brother could possess more than the uniform kit that consisted in 2 shirts, a pair of breeches, right, so sort of short trousers fastened just below, 2 pairs of boots that were in reality, we don't know precisely, but probably the term that defines the hose, rather, a surcoat, a sleeping bag, a blanket, a breviary, and a knife. Of course, it was possible to customize this clothing to some degree. This was at least possible. We find it among the Templars, of course. If you look at even the great masters of the Teutonic order, they bore their coat of arms, right, together with the one of the same order, and other elements, right, of the panoply, and even maybe the same boots or whatever, in fact, is excluded from this list that was needed, could in a way show the sort of maybe the status of the individual, but there was surely some sort of a rule and or criticism of that too. And generally speaking, the outlook was the one you see here, quite simple, quite and truly monastic. A fur coat had to be of cheap goat skin or sheep skin, and of course in certain climates it was quite useful. The Teutonic men slept in their shirt, right? Breeches and boots. They were not allowed to lock the box in which they kept their clothing, right? And they had therefore to quite maintain its order, as we've seen, at all costs, because it was just their own badge of honor in a way, and it was a privilege again to wear that white, as we have seen. So this obliged them also to take good care further of its treatment and so on. The Teutonic knights were not allowed, as we've said, to display their own coat of arms either. They were not allowed to joust either, right? Their training still entailed sort of of exercises that were reminiscent of tournaments, but it was not like participating around, because they had, of course, they had certain duties to show up, to attempt, but they were also living in the world, and of course this was the purpose of the monk itself. They could hunt only few types of game, by the way, so that most of their amusement consisted in wood carving. It was lawful under the laws of the order, and this also gave birth, let's say, to some interesting works of art, by the way, but it was considered as a form of contemplation and of sort of concentration and preparation to the much more heated the contrast here is how they were trained to handle that in the first place, and to give sort of free expression to their very loaded spirits, as the secular knights, at this point were also all-round artists to a degree. The Minnesänger, the peak of male creativity, is definitely also the peak of male violence, right? And so there had to be some venting valve for their creativity as well. And it was a harsh regime, as you understand. All courtesy and conviviality with the secular knights was forbidden. Courtesy stands for something more than, say, courtly activity. It means literally clienterly dependence by some degree. Because these knights were very similar, but they operated in different contexts, so they were very political figures in many ways, as they were used as envoys, bodyguards, but they participated from the top of a moral level. They were knights like all others. They were not some secluded people with no status, whatever. They were really that prestigious. Conviviality was mingling really in the most set courtly events, so they had to maintain a quite stern profile and living up to the same spiritual standards that were all designed to deprive themselves of so much, but for confirming their own beliefs and translating them into action in the field. And this was all one, right? Because there's really no divide there, right? As you learn, as you believe, as you understand why you're there, the more you're able to go out there in the world and making sense of it, molding it, right, to the image of God. And so being ready for being also one of the single most effective military orders in medieval times. So this is, of course, the ultimate objective there. Alright, Teutonic history is always fascinating. Again, I made a relatively few videos so far about them, but of course there is time, and there is also, hopefully at least, the chance of looking at really all the various aspects of the Teutonic order and going as much as in depth as possible, right? This is at least the objective of this channel, no matter what happens. For today, however, I stop it here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, do like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. As always, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.